Hello. Today we will be starting our geometry unit, and we are going to be looking at pairs of angles and their relationships. Now, there is some vocabulary involved here, and you may be familiar with some of this vocabulary, or you may not. So it's just kind of a good way to begin talking about angles and their relationships, and also maybe introduce or review vocabulary that you will hear throughout the unit. So starting with pairs of angles today, we're going to be looking first at the three types of angles and a little bit about them. And the first one we have here, we will be talking about adjacent angles. Adjacent means next to. So adjacent angles, if you notice here in the diagram, they have a common vertex. Now, the vertex is the point located right here. So that point we refer to as the vertex. And if you notice, we have angle 1 and angle 2. And they share this common side. So since they share this common side and the vertex, we can say they are adjacent to each other, or adjacent angles. Notice that we refer to angle 1 using this little angle symbol here. We'll have a lot of symbols to talk about as well. Some that maybe you've used before, or some maybe you haven't seen before. Let's go to the next pair. The next one we call a linear pair. Now, linear pairs are adjacent, so they have to be adjacent to each other. And if we notice here, angle 3 and angle 4 here are adjacent, but they form a linear pair because they have opposite rays. So they basically form a straight line, or a 180-degree line. And we would say they are adjacent, but we could also say they're a linear pair. So a linear pair would be more accurate than just to say adjacent in this case. Now, the next example are vertical angles, which you may have heard of before. Vertical angles are non-adjacent. So if we look here at 5 and 6, notice it creates this kind of X pattern. 5 and 6 are across from each other. Think of it that way. So they're non-adjacent angles that are formed by two intersecting lines. And we would say here angle 5 and angle 6 are considered vertical angles. So the first part of the notes here is kind of tiny, so I'll try to make that a little bit bigger as we go through. Is just identifying the different pairs in different situations, different examples. So if we look here in 1, 2, and 3, they want us to tell whether angles 7 and 8 in each figure are only adjacent. Are they adjacent and form a linear pair, or are they not adjacent? So remember, to form a linear pair, they need to form a straight line. So 7 and 8 in this first example are right next to each other. They share a side, and they also have two rays going opposite directions, which makes that straight line. So we would say here that they are adjacent and form a linear pair. Sometimes we just say they're a linear pair because linear pairs are naturally adjacent. So I may just say linear pair here because that would be the most accurate description. Now in 2, if we look at angle 7 and 8, they share a common side, and they share that vertex there, but they don't create a straight line situation like number 1. So in this case, we would just say that they are adjacent to each other. That would be the most appropriate in that situation. And the last one, they do share, if we look at angles 7 and 8, they do share the vertex here, but they don't have a common side. They don't share a side. We've got 2 really separate angles here that are only connected by that vertex. So in this case, they are not adjacent, and thus they cannot be a linear pair. So we could either say not adjacent, or we could just say none of the above. They want us to use not adjacent, so we'll go ahead and go with that. All right, now moving on over here to the side, they want you to name each of the following. So in this diagram, I know again it's tiny. These numbers here, this is number 1, this is number 6, just in case you can't read it. And then we have 5 and 2. So this is angle 5 and this is angle 2. And then here we have angle 3 and angle 4, just to make sure you can read those, since it's kind of tiny in the notes. So we want to identify the following based on the diagram. And some of them can have more than one answer. So for example, the first one wants you to name a pair of vertical angles. So you want to look at that definition and see which one of these could maybe represent that. And like I said, there could be more than one answer that's correct. So I'd like you to pause for a moment, and I'd like you to try to do that on your own. So identify in this diagram a pair of vertical angles, identify a linear pair, and identify an angle that is adjacent to angle 4. So go ahead and try to do that. And then after you pause, I'll have the answers written up so that you can check your work. And I'm going to pause as well so that I can get those answers in. And here we have the many combinations that you could have so you can check your answers. So a pair of vertical angles, there are 2 pairs or 2 options available. So 1 and 6, or angle 5 and angle 2. Remember, they have to be across from each other. They have to be formed by those intersecting lines. A linear pair, there are lots of different options. So I've listed all of them there so you can check to see if you have one of those combinations. But any of those would work. And then the last, an angle adjacent to angle 4, would have to be angle 3. Remember, adjacent means next to. So that's the only one possible there. All right. So now we're going to move here and add in a couple of others which you probably are more familiar with. I'm assuming that, so I apologize if you're not as familiar with these, but I'm thinking you have probably heard these before. So another type of angle relationship with angle pairs are when angles are complementary or when angles are supplementary. Complementary, of course, are when you add the angles together and they equal 90 degrees. And supplementary would be when you add the angle measures together and they equal 180 degrees. So we have that reference here for each one, so you can kind of refer back to that. Now, again, I know these examples are like super tiny, so I will try and do my best here if you can't read them very well. For example, on number 11, these both should read 110 degrees. So it doesn't necessarily look like it, but this should read, I'm on highlighter. This angle should read 110 degrees, And this one should also read 110 degrees. So sorry about that. I know it's super tiny there. And then they want us to tell whether each pair of labeled angles is complementary, supplementary, or neither. In this case, they both are 45-degree angles, so they would total up to 90, so we can just identify them as complementary angles. And I just kind of abbreviate those using those symbols there. 11, these are vertical angles, but they are not complementary or supplementary because they don't add up to 90 or 180. So that one has to be neither of those options. And then if we look here at 12 and 13, find the measure of each of the following angles. The first one is asking us to find the complement of angle S. That is labeled an S right here. And the degrees, it's kind of hard to read, but it should be 56 degrees there. So if we're going to have a complement, that means they have to add up to 90. So we would just take 90 minus the 56, and that would give us 34. So the complement of angle S would be 34 degrees to add up to 90. And then, of course, the supplement would be subtracting it from 180. And that would give us 124. And degrees, sorry, got to have my little degree measure there. And I'm also assuming, I should stop and say we always measure angles in degrees. Like I said, I'm making some assumptions that you've already had a little experience with some of these. And so if not, let me know in class, and I can definitely go over it with you again if you need it. Okay, on the back page here, oh, sorry, there's one last problem there at the bottom. So let's do that one as well. Again, I know it's kind of tiny, so I'll reread that. So it's telling us here, actually, before we get into this, I'm going to probably run out of time on this first recording, and I hate to get started and then have to stop. So we're going to stop there. If you can read that last problem and want to go ahead and work it out, great. If you can't read it, then we'll pick that up on the next video, okay? So this will be the end of the first part.